Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to dig into a hidden puzzle inside a word you use every single day. It's a word so simple, it almost feels silly to even question it. But, as you're about to see, the word tall is hiding a logical trap that has tied philosophers in knots for centuries, and it reveals something really profound about the fuzzy nature of our language.
So let's just jump right in with what seems like a super basic question. How tall is tall? Seriously. Is there a number? Is it 180 centimeters, 190, 200? The second you try to pin down an exact definitive number, you realize you can't. There's no sharp universal line, and that right there, that's where all the trouble starts.
I mean, the first clue is that what tall means depends entirely on the context, right? A person who is considered super tall for a jockey would, be considered pretty short for a professional basketball player. Our whole understanding of the word just shifts depending on what we're talking about and who we're comparing them to. And this gets us to the heart of the philosophical problem here, which is called vagueness. Words like tall or old, or even a color like red, they create these things called borderline cases. So for someone who is a certain height, the statement that person is tall isn't clearly true, but it's not clearly false either. They're just kind of stuck in this logical no man's land.
This brings up a really deep question. If we can't draw a precise line where tall officially begins, then how does the word even have a consistent meaning? And this isn't just some fun little word game. It actually creates a genuine paradox that seems to break the fundamental rules of logic itself.
Let's see how this all blows up into what philosophers call the Sorites Paradox. The name actually comes from the ancient Greek word for heap, and the original puzzle used grains of sand. But you know what? It works perfectly with height.
Okay, so check this out. We start with two statements, or premises, that just seem undeniably true. First, a 2-meter person is tall. I think we can all agree on that one. Second, if someone is tall, taking away just one tiny millimeter of height isn't going to suddenly make them not tall. This tolerance for tiny changes just feels like common sense. But if you apply that logic over and over, 1 millimeter at a time, you slide down this crazy slippery slope to a conclusion that's obviously false, that a 1.5-meter person is tall. What? Logic has somehow led us to a complete absurdity.
And that is the paradox in a nutshell. It shows that our intuition, our tolerance for these tiny little changes, which is a key part of what makes a word like tall so useful, is, well, apparently logically inconsistent. So, how do we get out of this mess? Logicians have come up with some pretty fascinating solutions.
All right, our first potential way out is something called fuzzy logic. And instead of trying to force a sharp line where there isn't one, this approach just completely rethinks the very nature of truth itself. So fuzzy logic says, what if truth isn't this binary on or off thing? It's not just true or false. What if instead truth works more like a dimmer switch? It can exist on a continuous scale from 0, meaning completely false, all the way up to 1, meaning completely true. Statements can actually be partially true.
And this is a really cool way to visualize it. A 2-meter person, okay, their truth value for being tall is 1.0, totally true. But what about a 1.8-meter person? Well, maybe they're a 0.7, they're kind of tall. And a 1.6-meter person could be a 0.1, meaning the statement is mostly false. The paradox just dissolves, because there's no sudden cliff you fall off, from completely true to completely false. It's just a gradual slide.
Okay, now for a completely different angle. It's called Supervaluationism, and this approach really wants to hang on to our classical true or false logic. But to do that, it has to get clever and redefine what it even means for a sentence to be true in the first place. The way it works is this. Imagine every possible reasonable place you could draw a sharp line for tall. A statement is only considered super true if it's true no matter which one of those lines you pick. So a 190-centimeter person? Yeah, they're tall according to all of them. But what about a borderline case, like 180.5 centimeters? Well, they're tall in some of our imaginary lines, but not on others. And here's the crucial move. For those borderline cases, the statement simply has no truth value. It just falls into what's called a truth value gap. The sentence, a 180.5 centimeter person is tall, is neither true nor false. Boom, paradox sidestepped.
So our third solution is called contextualism. And it basically argues that those first two ideas are kinda overthinking it. The problem isn't with truth itself, the problem is we're ignoring the most important factor of all, the actual conversation we're having.
This approach says the meaning of a vague word gets sharpened by how we use it moment to moment. When we say something like, hey, can you pass that to the tall guy? We are, just as part of the conversation, implicitly agreeing on a temporary definition of tall that's sharp enough for what we need right then. This is actually part of a bigger field called dynamic semantics, and it sees conversation as this process of constantly narrowing down possibilities. Every single statement we make updates the shared information we have, and it restricts what the words we use can possibly mean. The whole problem of vagueness just kind of disappears because the context always gives us the precision we need. So, we've looked at degrees of truth, truth-value gaps, and the power of context. At this point, you're probably wondering, okay, so which one is the right one?
Well, the simple answer is nobody agrees. There's no consensus on this. And believe me, these three are just the tip of the iceberg. Logicians have proposed even more radical solutions, and some of them get pretty wild. Like some suggest we should just accept that certain contradictions can be true. Others are willing to give up on basic logical rules that we just take for granted. There are even these incredible models that treat concepts like tall as actual geometric shapes in a conceptual space.
But maybe the point isn't about finding the one single correct answer. The real takeaway here is what this whole puzzle shows us about the messy but kind of beautiful relationship between our everyday language and formal logic. Our speech is just so incredibly subtle and flexible and context-aware in a way that rigid logical systems really struggle to pin down.
And that leaves us with one last big thought to chew on. If a concept as simple as tall can cause this much trouble for formal logic, what does that mean when we try to apply that same logic to far more complex and, frankly, far more important vague concepts, like justice or safety, or what it means to be reasonable? This puzzle isn't just a puzzle, it's a window into how we make sense of the world.